Welcome to the Fit Girl Magic podcast. If you are ready to find your inner magic, develop great habits, and a rock-steady mindset to feel confident, comfortable, and fit in your body, you are in the right place. I am Kim Barnes Jefferson, and I'll be giving you weekly doses of health, fitness, and life tips sprinkled with humor and real talk. If you're ready to be consistent without the stress of perfection, magic makers, it's time to slip into your favorite pair of PJs, grab some coffee, kick back, and listen to today's show. All right, Magic Makers, today's episode is a must listen, especially if you ever thought about osteoporosis was something that you needed to worry about later. Here's a stat that my guest gave me today that just stopped me in my tracks. A woman's risk of breaking a bone due to osteoporosis is equal to her combined risk of breast, uterine, and ovarian cancer. Yeah, let that one sink in. Yeah, there are no pink ribbons, no awareness months, no marathons, just silent bone loss until boop, we fall and we break something. So today I'm joined by Dr. John Neustadt. He is a doctor, researcher, and go-to expert for all things osteoporosis. We are talking why bone health should be on your radar now, not when you're 80s walking in a cane. And I know I started hearing some whispers about osteoporosis and, people are really thinking about more strength training and those kind of things. But today's episode really talks about the medications that might be silently stealing your bone health and how crash diets might be doing more harm than good, and what you can actually do today to reduce your fracture risk. This one's packed with some jaw-dropping stats, simple actions, and the kind of perspective shifts that might change the way you treat your health from this point forward. So do me a favor. If this lands with you, share this out with any of your women in your life because this is something that we all need to hear. All right, Magic Makers, enjoy the show. All right, I want to thank Miss Clara B. Lee from the Philippines. I've gone international, y'all. She leaves a great review here for me. She says so many valuable health tips that you can learn from. It is a must listen. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you so much. Again, I appreciate every single review that comes my way. It tells me that I'm giving you the information that you're looking for, the information that you're yearning for. I know that when I was in my, perimenopausal journey, I just was like, where can I turn to? What information can I find? And I'm grateful that I am giving that to you. These reviews mean the world to me. They light me up that I'm able to help you in any way possible. So if you are listening to this, do me a favor, head over to iTunes and leave me a review. If you're like, girl, I don't know how to do that, reach out to me. I will help you get that done. Have a great day and enjoy the rest of the show.
All right, Magic Makers, we are going to talk about something that is really important. And we're going to talk a lot about bone health. And, once we hit that magic age of like 40s to 50s, our doctors start having more and more conversations with us about osteoporosis and the importance of keeping our bones nice and healthy and strong. And so with that said, I am bringing on a wonderful doctor, Dr. John Neustadt, who is the king of osteoporosis. He's probably like, I'm not the king, but he is actually well cited for, and he's actually received an award for all of the citations that his work has been given. So he definitely knows his stuff because clearly if people are citing him, he's definitely on to something. So I want you to bring someone on to really help you kind of give it from a doctor's perspective, what osteoporosis is and really why we start caring about it. And so Dr. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I feel like for many people, like our doctors don't start having that conversation until we're in our 40s, right? That they start asking about our bone health, where, this is your thing. Should doctors start asking that question a little bit earlier?
Yeah, that's a great topic. And it's not a simple yes or no answer for me. I mean, one of the challenges in clinical medicine, and frankly, why even people who are older and should be getting screened for osteoporosis, and it should be a conversation, during a medical appointment are not getting the treatment and the screening they need is because most doctors are just confused about this condition, how to treat it, how to screen for it, what the testing results mean, which medications, if any, would be appropriate, diet, lifestyle, how to approach this holistically based on what the research shows, strengthens bone and reduces fractures. So obviously it's my thing. I mean, this is my jam. I love bones, and I would love for people to have it as part of a conversation earlier in life, especially women in their 40s, even if it's just mentioned in passing. But in a medical appointment, there typically is limited amount of time and multiple things that are going on that need to be addressed. And I wish it would become just part of a screening questionnaire in general. And that could help take care of at least just raising the awareness. I think one of the biggest aspects of addressing this epidemic, and it is an epidemic, is awareness.
Hey, Magic Makers, before we dive back in, I've got a question for you. Do you ever feel like you're ordering a margarita and you're going to tell yourself, damn, I am going to be off track for the next week? Like one fun night is going to somehow cancel your progress. Girl, just know that mindset's just got to go. That is why I created the Guilt-Free Alcohol Guide, your free pass to sip smarter without the spirals and the guilt. Whether it's a wine night, brunch mimosas, beachside cocktails, this guide shows you how to enjoy your drinks without wrecking your health goals. It's quick, it's fun, and it's going to turn everything you ever thought about alcohol and weight loss on its head. So if you're ready to stop choosing between your results or your real life, this guide is for you. So go over to the show notes and grab the free Guilt-Free Alcohol Guide right now, because the only thing you should ever feel after a glass of wine is satisfied.
You know, you're 1,000% right, because I feel like, osteoporosis isn't having the moment that menopause is. Like right now, I feel like, a lot of people are, celebrities are talking about it and all the challenges around it, but osteoporosis isn't getting that kind of glow up that menopause is getting right now.
You're right. And there are real considerations as to why that's the case. And one is it's asymptomatic. Typically, there are no symptoms of your bones getting weaker until suddenly you break a bone and you end up in the hospital. Second, there are no big campaigns around it in terms of ribbons or fundraisers or marathons like breast cancer. Let me just tell you a few of the statistics around osteoporosis and why it should be in everybody's mind and why I hope it gets more awareness. I mean, first of all, when a woman goes through menopause and for the 10 years after is the fastest rate of bone loss. So that's a real important time to be working on this issue. The most dangerous aspect of this disease is breaking a bone. If you're a woman with osteoporosis and you fracture a hip, there's up to a 36% chance that you're going to be dead within a year. And in fact, globally, osteoporosis is second only to cardiovascular disease as a health issue. And every 30 seconds, someone somewhere in the world is breaking a bone because of osteoporosis. A woman's risk of an osteoporosis fracture is equal to her combined risk of breast, uterine, and ovarian cancer. Osteoporosis fractures account for more days spent in a hospital than other diseases like diabetes, heart disease, and breast cancer. And if, God forbid, you have breast cancer and you fracture and end up in a hospital, there's an 83% increased chance that you're going to die compared to a woman with breast cancer who hasn't had a fracture.
Wow. I mean, you just threw out some numbers right now that I'm like, literally, I'm surprised my head is still on my shoulders. You're like, there's no ribbons, there's no marathons. I'm like, these statistics are valid for a ribbon, valid for like osteoporosis month, because, I've always heard about women breaking their hip, but you think like when I'm 80, not like in my 40s.
Right. And I think it's happening. Unfortunately, most people aren't getting screened for osteoporosis. And so we don't really know the true number. So the estimates now are about 50 million Americans have osteoporosis or are at risk of osteoporosis because they have some bone loss. It's primarily a female condition where 80% of cases happen in women. And most people think of it as something that happens to women, in their 50s, 60s, 70s as they go through menopause and after that. But it's happening early and earlier, and a big hidden cause of the destruction of bone and what's happening are medications. One of the most commonly prescribed medications for women are antidepressants, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SNRIs, the other category, Wellbutrin, Prozac, those sorts of things. There are serotonin receptors on bone, and they activate the bone destroying cells called osteoclasts. And there are two metabolically active cells in bone. One are the osteoblasts and one are the osteoclasts. The osteoblasts build up and create new healthy bone, and the osteoclasts break down old worn out bone in a process called bone remodeling. And we need that. We need that for healthy, strong bones. And in fact, about every 10 years, our bone is completely remade. We have all brand new bone. And osteoporosis is really a condition of imbalance where the destructive forces are winning. Those osteoclasts are outperforming the osteoblasts. Well, there are lots of things that skew that push it in the direction of bone destruction and osteoclast activity. And one of them is those antidepressant medications. They are so potent at destroying bones that for a woman taking an SSRI, for every 19 women taking an SSRI for 1 to 5 years, we will expect one of them to fracture.
Wow.
And that's just one of a long and growing list of medications that destroys bone, like acid blocking medications, aromatase inhibitors, glucocorticoids. I mean, it's just the list goes on and on. So I think it's like really occurring in people younger, but they're not being screened for it, but they're at risk.
So let's go back for someone who's like, I think osteoporosis is a word we've heard of, but maybe we might not know the definition. So I'm big on making sure people understand like what a word means that you might hear in conversation or out in the Google land.
Great question. So the definition of osteoporosis is where you have bones that are getting weaker and it predisposes somebody to fracture. Typically, it is diagnosed by a bone density test that measures the mineral component of the bone. And it's given a T-score and a Z-score. So by definition, a T-score measures your bone density to somebody of your same gender, of the same race, who is in their 20s. So if I'm a 65-year-old Black woman, it would be my bone density, my T-score would be comparing my bone density to a 20 to 29-year-old Black young woman. A Z-score, in contrast, compares your bone density to somebody of your own age group. And the diagnosis of osteoporosis is typically based on a T-score. And that's getting a little technical, but it's important because I want people to understand that although that number on the test can give you an indication of what's happening to your bone, it's important on any test to ask the question, how well does it predict my fracture risk? Because the most dangerous thing about this disease is not whether there's a number on a test is low. Right. It's whether or not you break a bone. And what we know is that for women with osteoporosis, a bone density test only predicts 44% of them who will fracture and only 21% of men. It's not a great indicator of fracture risk. It's one piece of a much larger puzzle. And unfortunately, typically that's all that's tracked. Your bone density goes up and everybody's happy.
Right.
And what happened with me about 20 years ago, not only am I a clinician, a doctor, but I'm a husband and a son-in-law. And at some point I'm going to be, everybody's a patient too.
Right.
So I really empathize with the experience of people and try and understand how I can do a better job. And what happened is I was helping my mother-in-law who had osteoporosis, giving her some recommendations for diet, lifestyle, nutritional support. And she was working with her medical doctor who'd prescribed Fosamax, and her bone density was going up. So her physician was happy. I was happy. She was happy.
Right.
And then she tripped on a rug in her house and fractured her hip. And I thought something's wrong with this picture. So I started diving into the research, and what I found shocked me. Not only that we've known since the 1990s that a bone density test predicts less than half of women who will break a bone, but that the bone density test really only measures the quantity of bone, the amount of bone, not the quality of bone, which is the bone strength. It only measures the minerals in the bone. But bone is a complex tissue like all tissues. It's made up of different things. The minerals like calcium, magnesium, that's just one part of the bone. There are 180 to 200 different proteins in bone.
Wow.
The main structural component being collagen. Collagen is stronger than steel and it's flexible. You can take a chicken bone and soak it in vinegar, keep switching out the vinegar to keep it fresh. And after, 3 to 5 days, all those minerals are going to be pulled out of the bone. They're going to be gone. And what you're left with are those proteins and that collagen. And the chicken bone is flexible. You can twist it, bend it, hit it against the wall, run over it with the car. It will not break.
Right.
That's the power and the strength of collagen. And so it's really important to think of bone as the living tissue, and what can we do to reduce somebody's fracture risk, not just by increasing the bone density test, that's one piece of the puzzle, but by helping to make bone quality better, helping to make bones stronger. And there are lots of things people can do that can stimulate those osteoblasts, the cells that produce healthy bone, to create more collagen, which, by the way, that's what the minerals bind to. The collagen is the scaffolding. The proteins are the scaffolding. And the amount of protein somebody consumes can account for 2 to 4% of bone mineral density alone, just through that part of diet.
So quick question. So, it's funny because I think most people think, I get this bone scan and they tell me, hey, you're rocking it. And you think, okay, and you walk away. So is there a test for fracture, or is that not a thing just yet?
That is such a great question. There is no one perfect test, unfortunately. Clobbering together, somebody's risks and risk factors through various methods is currently the best way to understand it. In the research, what we know is most predictive of fractures is somebody's gait and mobility. Their bone. It's the most consistent predictor of fractures.
Yeah.
Because 95% of fractures occur because somebody falls. So anything we can do to reduce the risk of falling, like strength training, building muscle, fracture proofing your home with grab bars in the showers, making sure loose steps are fixed. Those sorts of things are really important. And there are what are called modifiable risk factors, non-modifiable risk factors, and potentially modifiable risk factors. Now, the non-modifiable risk factors, just that are risk factors for osteoporosis and fractures that none of us can change, are our age.
Right.
We're all getting older and fracture risk increase as we get older. The potentially modifiable risk factors include the medications. It may be possible to get on a different medication that doesn't have the bone destroying effects, or talk to your doctor. Maybe a lot of people are on medications for years and don't have a medication review consistently. Getting a medication review is really important, not only from your doctor, but from your pharmacist, and seeing if there are any interactions, see if any of them destroy bones. But also speak with your physician or work with an integrative clinician who might be able to address whatever issues you're having and allow you to decrease the dose of the medication or discontinue them altogether.
Right.
On the modifiable risk factor portion, in terms of fractures and what can predict what is associated with increased fracture risk, are diet, exercise, sleep, connection to community, which, all of that to me, and fundamentally, a lot of this is about mindset.
Yeah.
And helping to start doing those steps consistently day after day to move in the direction of health. And one of the things that I tell patients and that I write in my book, Fracture Proof Your Bones, is when people come to me, they typically they have the diagnosis and they have the bone density test result, and they're scared, and rightly so. It's a scary, dangerous condition that should be taken seriously. But I have people take a breath, and I reframe it, and I tell them that yes, it's serious, but it's not an emergency. I tell them about the limitations of that bone density test. And what I say is there's time to create a holistic bone health plan that makes sense for you. Now, that may include osteoporosis medication, but it may not. It's ultimately up to the individual patient to decide what's best. And there's time to learn and put together a program that makes sense to attack this. But these are typically, this is a health issue that has taken, years, decades to create. It's not something that's going to be turned around immediately. And so that's why this sort of consistent effort, little baby steps, every day, moving in that direction of healthier bones. And when you're doing the holistic approaches, they also reduce your risk for heart disease, dementia, diabetes, obesity. I mean, it just goes on and on and on.
Now, so if I am given, the diagnosis of osteoporosis, I'm assuming there are different levels of where you are in the disease.
That's correct. So there's two general categories. One is called osteopenia, which is pre-osteoporosis. It means you have some bone loss, but you're not, you don't meet the diagnostic criteria. And that's from a T-score of -1 to -2.5. It's expressed as a negative. Like, how far are you below, how much less bone do you have compared to somebody in their 20s? And then a T-score of -2.5 or lower, -2.7, -2.8, that is osteoporosis, and it's measured at different areas, typically the lumbar spine, the lower spine, and the hip. And yes, the lower the bone density, that does increase your risk for fractures. Like I said, there's, it has some predictive value.
Right. And so, we talked about, I'm gonna circle back to the medications you talked about, but are there any kind of just the natural decline of female hormones that might be affecting our bones, so that when estrogen and progesterone start to slowly decline, is that a potential problem for osteoporosis?
It is absolutely a problem. So as estrogen declines and the female hormones decline as a woman goes through, perimenopause and menopause, that is the fastest rate of bone loss. That's when women lose bone the fastest during that period and for the 10 years after. Supplementing with hormone replacement therapy is associated with about I believe it's a 40% reduction in fracture risk. And there is good evidence now for its safety. It needs to be, you need to be screened for it to be done safe, but that it can be safe, done safely, and incredible health benefits, not only for bone and fracture reduction, reducing fracture risk, but also for cardiovascular disease, brain health, neurological health, and more.
Yeah. And so going back to the medications, a lot of the medications you just rattled off are medications that men take as well. So typically when you think of osteoporosis, the first person you think of is a woman. Now, given that men are taking Prozac and men are taking acid reducers and men are taking many of these other medications, is that now starting to become more of a challenge, or because of the makeup of men, they might not be?
There's no studies that I know of that have looked at men on these SSRI medications and the risk for fractures, but there's nothing that I can think of that would lead me to believe that the effect on bones in men is different than the effect on women.
Right.
And so I believe it is definitely a risk. And we know that with other medications like prednisone. We also know in terms of hormones with men that low testosterone is a risk for osteoporosis and fractures. So I do believe that the risks are equal in men and women. And it's important to note also, even though that 20% of cases of osteoporosis occur in men, if a man does fracture, his risk for dying is higher than in a woman, because we tend to have, as men, more severe comorbidities, or we have other diseases that we're experiencing, and that the symptoms tend to be more severe. I do want to say, though, in terms of menopause, and one of the things that's often missed by my colleagues is that a woman goes in, she's perimenopausal or menopausal, she has bone loss, and they just check the box and they decide, okay, yes, it's because of menopause.
And that's it.
Without doing any more analysis. And what the research shows is that 30% of cases of osteoporosis in postmenopausal women are due to other causes, not the drop in estrogen. So that is one thing, but there can be multiple things happening at the same time, and often there are. So that's important to understand as a patient. And I'm really passionate about educating patients to what questions can they ask, and that's an important one. And so, I mean, I'm grateful that you've invited me on to talk about this, so I can hopefully reach more people with these messages to help them.
And every doctor that I have on the show is what you just said. Ask questions. It's like go in, and because most of us, you grew up and I got the white coat says whatever it is, you accept it and you walk out the door. And nowadays, if you said to me, Kim, you have menopause, and I have questions. I'm like, what does that mean? And I think, hearing from doctors like yourself who have seen it firsthand, you're like, your patient is going to walk out the door and they're going to Google it. And they're going to have then 5 million more questions about the diagnosis that you just gave them. And that there are, like you said, with menopause, there's 4 million other things that interweave into that. And there could be other underlying things that are happening that as a patient, I'm just like, oh, it's just menopause. And I walk away thinking that I'm good.
Exactly. And they're not. And like my mother-in-law, who thinks she's protected and she wasn't, and thinking you're protected and being protected are two different things.
Right.
Which is why in my book, many chapters of the book, there are take action sections at the end of it with a list of questions to write down to ask your doctor. Make sure you go in prepared. And I'm an advocate of that, of go in with your list of questions written down, because it's really hard during a conversation with a doctor to remember everything that's been answered, to all the answers, and also to remember what questions to ask. So being preparing for that appointment is a step that cannot be underemphasized how important that is.
Agreed, 1,000%. And I always encourage my women. I'm like, if you know in 6 months that you have a doctor's appointment, start a note on your phone and just start writing down any question that you think of, any symptom that has been bothering you. Think about it and write down how long it's been, because you want to be able to, you don't want to be dismissed because you're like, oh, I don't know how long it's been going. Like, you want to be as factual as you can so that you can open up that dialogue. And so
true.
One of the things you talked about earlier, you kind of touched on it, was about people's lifestyles. And one of the people that I speak with a lot are the chronic dieter. And if I'm someone who is a chronic dieter, is that a potential for me to have a red flag for osteoporosis down the line?
That's a great question. And for me, I would have to know more details of how they're doing the diet, because diet is there's not just one way of diet. I think, calorie restriction is a documented risk factor for osteoporosis.
This is like ultra calorie restriction.
Absolutely. Nutritional deficiencies, not getting enough protein. Those are definite risk factors for osteoporosis. And I might add that when it comes to diet, what I'm a fan of is really, and I'm sure you are as well, teaching people the dietary pattern, the healthiest dietary pattern for them to follow, to eat for their health, to promote their health for the rest of their life. So they're off of what's often this yo-yo effect of this diet, and then they just bounce back up and gain even more weight back.
Right. And so, so you talked about like lifestyle. So we talked about sleep and stress. Those two are kind of, I always tell people, are like the two biggest things that if most people dealt with those two things, a lot of other health issues, including osteoporosis, would not be as prevalent in our society as they are. What are some of the reasons why, stress impacts bone health?
Well, I love that you brought this up, because it's not talked about enough.
No.
And it's definitely not talked about enough by physicians. And what we know is the stress response. Short-term stress is adaptive. It can help us focus. It can help us escape a dangerous situation. but too many people are under chronic long-term stress. And that wreaks havoc on your health, not just increasing the risk for cardiovascular disease and dementia and diabetes and obesity and insomnia, but yes, also osteoporosis. What happens is that prednisone glucocorticoids are the medications I mentioned before that damage bone. Prednisone is a very common one, but we produce our own natural glucocorticoids, one of them being cortisol. And cortisol is anti-inflammatory, which is very helpful in the short term. But in the long term, it also has similar effects to the prednisone type medications in terms of damaging bone. Not only does it strip the bone of minerals, but it damages collagen and makes collagen stiffer. And stiff collagen is more fragile collagen, and it reduces our body's ability to create more collagen. And so those combinations of effects, even when somebody doesn't have a disease where they have elevated cortisol beyond the normal level, even within the normal range of cortisol, that has been shown to increase how fast somebody loses bone. There was a study that was done where they took healthy adults and they tested their cortisol, and those that were towards the high end of normal had faster bone loss than those who had lower levels of cortisol.
And, it's very interesting because you're right. I think, I had a physical a couple of months ago, and I think to myself, the questions that they asked me, and I don't think she ever asked me about stress.
I don't. And even if they ask about that, sometimes what they're not asking about in terms of lifestyle is engagement, community engagement, being connected to other people, because that has been shown not only to reduce the risk of all-cause mortality, that is death from any cause, including osteoporosis, but if somebody were to fracture and end up in the hospital, having a strong social network is associated with faster and better healing. And we know that being connected to other people and being engaged raises the happy chemical oxytocin. Right. And that brings down cortisol. It lowers cortisol. So it's important to understand what people are doing, in terms of their life and how they're approaching it. Right. That is causing them to have high levels of chronic stress. But I think equally important is to not just send a patient off and say, well, just do some stress reduction. Yeah. Because it's not prescriptive enough. It's too vague. Yeah. And I like to be very specific with patients to give them some things to try. And look, it's not a one size fit all. This is very customized of what resonates with each person and each person's abilities and lifestyle and other commitments and what they can do. But there is something for everybody in terms of being able to reduce stress, not just lifestyle changes and improving sleep, because that's a stress on the body, not having enough sleep, and has been shown to increase osteoporosis and fracture risk. But also supplements. There's some dietary supplements that help with adrenal support and can help calm the nervous system down to better handle stress. So it's not as jarring to the system.
So, speaking of supplements, there's especially for bone health, the two that you've heard about probably your entire life, calcium and vitamin D. Those are like the two kind of like superstars of bone health that you hear about. Are those the superstars that we've been led to believe, or has their research shown that not so much?
The way that I answer this question about dietary supplements or any recommendation that's been given is similar to how I answer and approach the question of the bone density test and how valuable that is. So the question that I teach people to ask when they're hearing somebody recommend something is, has it been shown to maintain bone strength by showing that it reduces fractures? Because that's the most important indicator of if you have strong bones. So there are clinical trials that are designed not just to detect bone density, but to look at fractures and determine if an intervention actually reduces fractures. So for calcium and vitamin D, they're okay. And I think it's important to consider those, but we're looking at about an 18 to 23% reduction in fractures. And the challenge I have with those nutrients and how they tend to be discussed in doses is as if it's a one size fits all. So I'm a fan of testing vitamin D And what we know is that when the vitamin D is, the result is 30 to 44 on a test, that is associated with the maximum hip fracture reduction. So testing your vitamin D, it fluctuates throughout the year depending on your latitude and the season, and making sure you're supplementing when you need it. And a lot of doctors like even higher, 50, 60, 70 for immune health. But for bone health, it's that 30 to 44 range that's important to make sure you're in. And when it comes to calcium, I think most people are getting way too much. The US RDA for calcium is 1,200 milligrams a day for women and 1,000 milligrams a day per men. Many clinicians are still recommending 1,000, 1,200 milligrams of calcium as a dietary supplement. But the recommendation for how much you should get is based on all sources, diet and dietary supplements.
Gotcha.
The average American woman consumes about 800 milligrams of calcium in her diet. So just getting another 400 milligrams from a dietary supplement is enough. Right. And getting more than that, like an extra 1,000 or 1,200, starts to get her into a range where it could be dangerous. You don't want to get more than 2,000 to 2,500 milligrams of calcium per day from all sources. And the average American man gets about 1,000 milligrams of calcium from their diet. So men typically don't need extra calcium as a dietary supplement. And so that's how I approach calcium and vitamin D. It's not a one size fits all.
Right. And and you mentioned collagen, and that now has become the darling of the supplement industry. Is the calcium that people are intaking, is that going to support my bones, or is that supporting some other processes in my body, or is that just junk?
Well, calcium is used for a lot of different. You're talking about calcium, right?
No, I'm sorry.
Collagen.
Collagen.
No, that's okay. Hydrolyzed collagen is absorbed in the body. The types 1 and 3 collagen are what are typically found in products, or type 2 collagen. It's the type 1 collagen that is specifically in bone. 90% of bone collagen is type 1 collagen. And there are clinical trials showing that it improves bone density. There are no studies looking at fractures as the outcome. Gotcha. And we can build our own collagen. We can manufacture it. So I go back to that protein question in diet. If you can get it from diet, you're better off. I have a supplement company. I created a collagen product specifically for bones, but I do recommend people start with diet. Diet first, always. And a supplement should be used as the FDA intended, which is a supplement to a healthy diet. So the minimum amount of protein that I recommend people get is based on their body weight. And if you take your body weight and multiply it by 0.6, that gives you the number of your body weight in pounds times 0.6. That gives you the number of grams of protein that you should be consuming a day, unless of course you have chronic kidney disease and you have to be on a low protein diet. And then the dietary supplements like a protein powder or collagen, are used to bridge that gap, because when you're giving your body those raw materials, it can produce the collagen. But yes, dietary supplement. The collagen dietary supplements have been shown to improve bone density, but there are other nutrients that for me are first line. That collagen is not first line. There are other nutrients that have been shown, repeatedly in actually one other nutrient in clinical trials, not only to improve bone density, but maintain strong bones by reducing fractures in women with postmenopausal osteoporosis.
And what was that nutrient?
That is MK4, which is a specific form of vitamin K2. And so there are different forms of vitamin K2.
And what food group does that normally hang out in?
It's produced by mammals, so you can get in dairy and meat, but only in very, very small amounts. You cannot get the clinical trial doses in food. You can only get it through dietary supplement. And the clinical trial dose of the MK4 is 45 milligrams per day. Of most of the supplements out there with vitamin K, first of all, don't have the type of vitamin K shown to work. They have different types of vitamin K. So you have to make sure it's MK4. And the only dose that's been shown to reduce fractures in clinical trials is 45 milligrams per day. And in terms of bone density, MK4 plus vitamin D3, combining those two, were superior than MK4 alone. They have synergistic effects at improving bone density.
Neat. Like that's That's good to know, because when you said you can't get it from dairy, in my mind, I think about like you go to the grocery store and you see the entire dairy counter and you're like, I'll take it all, please, and see if we can get that.
Yeah, and I do want to say, just to be very specific, because I love data and I love numbers and I love research, that the MK4 45 milligrams per day in clinical trials were showing over 70% reduction in fractures.
Oh, wow. That's pretty impressive.
It's huge.
Yeah.
And this was an issue, frankly, that I encountered. I talked a little bit about my story and how I got into this with my, 20 years ago with my mother-in-law. And so when I dove into the research, I discovered that nutrient. This has been approved by the Ministry of Health in Japan since 1995. It's not new. And there have been more and more studies even since then showing how safe it is and how well it works and how, its uses in the body. But it didn't exist. And that is why I created my dietary supplement, to produce these products that I needed for my patients and had the clinical trial doses of nutrients that I needed to help them that didn't exist in other products. So I was the first one to bring it over in the clinical trial dose into the US. And now there are 3 different versions of the product, all with the MK4 45 milligrams per day, and vitamin D, and just different amounts of calcium, because like I mentioned, it has to be customized. Not everybody needs the same amount, even a calcium-free version.
Right.
All guaranteed to work.
Perfect. And so now if I'm a woman listening to this show, and what are 3 things I can do starting today to improve my bone health and reduce my risk of fracture?
Right. So the first thing is, if you haven't had an assessment done, to get an assessment done to understand your risk. So first, that's a great baseline. If it's appropriate to get a bone density test, get a bone density test. If you can go, there's a free online tool called Frax, Frax. You can put in some data there. It's very limited, but it'll give you some. It asks for some medications, for example, like prednisone, but it doesn't ask if you're taking other medications like antidepressants or acid blocking medications. So like I said, there's not one great test. It's about just piecing things together. Your strength, and are you able to get up unassisted from a seated position on the floor without using your hands, just standing up with just your legs? I like that test. That's not something I've seen in the research, but I like that. It really shows if somebody's strong. That circumference of your thigh circumference muscle is associated with longevity and being healthy. And so strength is important. Are you exercising? Are you getting good, healthy sleep? About 7 hours of sleep. That's quality, deep sleep. Are your hormones balanced? Are you managing stress? Have you done a medication review? It's not an easy, simple question. So understanding that baseline and then creating a plan is very important. Anybody who's concerned about their bone health because of the clinical trials on the nutrients, if they're taking, vitamin D or calcium or considering it, taking one of my OsteoK products to me is just non-negotiable for almost everybody because of the strength of the research. Because of the benefits physiologically of how those nutrients promote bone health, and not just bone health, but neurological health and immune health and health throughout the body, because all nutrients are used for many different things, not just in this case for bones. And I would really say get a copy of my book. And that's not just to promote my own work. It is the only one that I'm aware of that really walks people through the questions to ask their doctors about the medications to make sure they're getting the best advice about their own medications that they may be taking. But questions about the osteoporosis medications, how to think about exercise and create an exercise program, how to think about, how much sleep do you need and what are things you can do to minimize sleep destroyers, and what's the research on social networks and, getting involved in things, and what's the clinical trials on the nutrients, and just chapter by chapter.
And just, we kicked off the show and you literally just like rattled off like an encyclopedia of things where I knew that, if someone were to break their hip, it's pretty catastrophic, but I didn't realize that it wasn't at a, it was even now can be catastrophic for some people. And it's been, everything you've said has just been very eye-opening. So I could only imagine the aha moments I would have reading your book, from starting probably at page 1 until all the way through the end. So absolutely, guys, I'm going to link in the show notes. I will link his book. I will also link his supplement company as well, because I know I get a lot of questions about vitamin D and that kind of thing. And I'm always grateful to find folks like Dr. John here who have quality product, because there's a lot of crap out there and I don't want you wasting your money on crap. So I ask everyone one thing that makes them feel magical. And what would be your one thing?
I think this interview is an example of it. And that's connecting with other people, helping to share information. We're all in this together. Mm-mm. And I'm a big believer of us all helping each other to live more vibrant, full, wholesome lives, so we can show up better every day for ourselves, for our families, for our communities, and all contribute our unique gifts to the world. And so these sorts of things help me to feel alive and vibrant and connected. And I'm just, again, so grateful that you invited me on.
No, I'm grateful that you are here. And, you've given me a lot of, I'd like conversations that bring multiple perspectives to something that we've only given a couple of pat answers to from our doctors or just even in social media. So I'm grateful that, you are an expert and, your mother-in-law was like, what's going on? And you're like, hang on. And you felt that you needed to dig a little deeper to figure out how you can best support her and other women in your life and other women in the world. And where can people find you on the socials?
Thank you for asking. The best way to find my work is through my website, nbihealth.com. NBI stands for Nutritional Biochemistry Incorporated, nbihealth.com. And our social media channels are linked on there. Tons of free articles, lots of information. There's a little search icon in the upper right. You can just search for something you're interested in. Likely there's an article that I wrote on there. The book is on the website. My products are on the website. And you can always reach me through the website as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. And Magic Makers, do me a favor. If there was like an aha moment that you got out of this podcast, do me a favor, screenshot this and make sure to tag both of us on any social media that you are on. And do me a favor, share this with a friend. And I'm not just talking a 40-something-year-old friend. Share this with your daughters. It's now time for us all start to really focus in on our bone health before we have to play catch up. All right. I will talk to you guys next week and have an amazing day.
Thank you for listening to the Fit Girl Magic podcast. If you've made it this far, yay. I'm thinking you enjoyed the show. Let's continue the conversation on Instagram. You can find me at Kim Jefferson Coach. In order for me to keep sharing this message, do me a favor and leave me a 5-star review on iTunes. While you're there, don't forget to subscribe so that you won't miss an episode. New episodes are available every Wednesday. The Fit Girl Magic podcast is intended to provide you with tips, tools, and strategies that will help you make better decisions about your health. I really appreciate your feedback and your support. Thank you so much.